It is a great pleasure to welcome and introduce Ambassador Donald Steinberg. In fact, to welcome back a native Southern Californian to the West and Best Coast. I had actually checked the weather in Washington on the computer this evening, but Ambassador Steinberg may have even more news than I do, because just shortly before this, he mentioned there were 7 inches of snow, but I checked and I saw it was 31 degrees and cloudy, and I just wanted to show you how warm our welcome is, that we get the weather to cooperate with us and have a beautiful, beautiful Southern California day for you. Make it even harder for you to get back on the plane tomorrow to go back to Washington. A career diplomat in service to this country for more than 28 years, Ambassador Steinberg has had a long day today, beginning early this morning with a keynote address to 600 high school students who were here for our 7th annual WorldLink Youthtown meeting that brings together students from San Diego and Mexico to discuss issues of global concern. My colleagues, Dr. Dee Aker and Shelley Lyford, organized this year's meeting, and it was very successful. Have no doubt in your minds that the youth of today are as smart or smarter than we were. And speaking with them, as many of us had the opportunity to do, is a wonderful chance for us to hear new perspectives and different perspectives on issues of global concern. This year's topic for the Youthtown meeting, Preventing Deadly Conflict, the Inclusion Factor, is also relevant this evening for our distinguished lecture series as we try to understand how to prevent deadly conflict. Ambassador Steinberg is well placed to discuss preventing deadly conflict by addressing the importance of gender and human rights. Before being appointed to his current position as the first director of the Joint Policy Council in September 2003, he worked on the reconstruction of Afghanistan, where, as we learned under the Taliban, women played no role in society and had no power and no voice. Ambassador Steinberg has worked to increase and promote the voice of women in post-conflict societies such as Afghanistan while he was Principal Deputy Director of Policy Planning for the State Department from 2001 to 2003, where he helped formulate and coordinate long-term policies to achieve U.S. foreign policy objectives. Prior to these positions, Ambassador Steinberg was Special Representative of the President and Secretary of State for Global Humanitarian Demining. Landmines continue to pose grave danger in countries such as Angola, where Ambassador Steinberg served as ambassador from 1995 to 1998. Having spent the past few years in Washington, still more than half of Ambassador Steinberg's foreign service career has been spent overseas. In Angola, as mentioned, Brazil, the Central African Empire, now the Central African Republic, Malaysia, Mauritius, and South Africa. He has served as Deputy White House Press Secretary and became the Senior Director for African Affairs at the National Security Council in April 1994, just days before the genocide in Rwanda was unleashed, and has also served as Special Coordinator for Haiti. So he is no stranger to conflict. In December 2003, in recognition for his commitment to promoting women's voices in policymaking, he received the Hunt Award for advancing women's role in policy formulation. Ambassador Steinberg has received other awards as well, including the State Department's Distinguished Service Award, its highest performance award, the Fraser Award for promoting international peace, the Presidential Meritorious Honor Award, 5 State Department Superior Honor Awards, and Columbia University's Pulitzer Fellowship and the Hoff Award for Excellence in Print. That's a whole nother career I think we haven't heard about, which is his master's in journalism from Columbia University. In 2000, Ambassador Steinberg had the distinction of addressing the United Nations General Assembly, and I don't know which distinction was greater, giving the commencement address at his alma mater, Reed College. He has a master's degree in political economy from the University of Toronto, but also, as I mentioned, in journalism from Columbia. Currently, Ambassador Steinberg, as head of the Joint Policy Council, strives to coordinate U.S. foreign assistance with our foreign policy goals and objectives. Just before getting on the plane to come here to San Diego yesterday, he oversaw a meeting of the Joint Policy Council and the dozen working groups that are part of it to address such issues as democracy, human rights, post-conflict reconstruction, and social and environmental issues. For those of you who know a little bit about the work of the Institute, you know that these are certainly key and core to the work that we are doing. And so it is a great pleasure and honor to welcome Ambassador Donald Steinberg.
Thank you, Joyce. It's really a great pleasure to be here this evening to address the distinguished lecture series. I wanted to begin by paying tribute to the vision and the generosity of Mrs. Joan B. Kroc in supporting this program. I also want to pay tribute to the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice and the work that Joyce New, D. Aker, and a variety of others are doing, not only here, but around the world. I'm pleased to be able to announce that the Joan B. Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice is being renamed the American Embassy San Diego because of the superb work that our diplomats are doing here on a daily basis. Don't expect payment for it, though. Sorry. As you can guess, even with the weather in Washington, there are many reasons for me to be inside the Beltway right now. But it is too easy to be captured by the Washington bureaucracy, especially within the hollowed walls of the State Department. At the State Department, we have desks that cover virtually every country on earth, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. But there's no United States desk. And so it's essential for us to participate in programs interactively like this, in order to be reminded that we are ultimately responsible to the American people. I joined the State Department in 1975, straight out of graduate school, and underwent one of the great cultural transformations, moving from blue jeans to pinstripes, and perhaps more importantly, moving from studying Soren Kierkegaard to working for Henry Kissinger. I soon found myself serving as vice consul in the Central African Empire, as Joyce mentioned, a country that was suffering under a truly insane dictator, His Excellency Emperor Jean Bidel Bokassa I. Thank goodness there was never a second. I've spent most of the last 28 years at diplomatic missions overseas, in Brazil, where we helped promote freedom and democracy as a military regime left power. In Malaysia, where we supported a half-Muslim, half-Chinese country to address ethnic divisions and the role of Islam in a modern state. In Mauritius, and I challenge this audience to identify exactly where Mauritius is. It is a tiny island, a speck of land in the middle of the Indian Ocean, where we help prepare the population to find its place in the world economy and to emerge as a beneficiary and not a victim of globalization. I was then truly honored to serve in South Africa in the heady days following Nelson Mandela's release from prison, when we helped blacks and whites make the transition from racist apartheid to non-racial democracy. And most recently as American ambassador to Angola, where we helped build peace in a country that had been held hostage by civil war for 3 decades. It's been a great life, and indeed one that's been dominated by exactly the theme of this distinguished lecture series: conflict, gender, and human rights. The importance of this mission has been magnified in the 28 months since September 11th. We all remember where we were that morning. I was at the State Department, from where we stared in disbelief at the black smoke rising from the Pentagon across the Potomac River. I went with a small group of policy planners to a windowless office in the State Department Operations Center for the first of many all-night sessions to support the President's efforts to build and maintain a global coalition to fight terrorism. It was really hard for us to control the emotion of that moment, but we knew in an instant that our world would never be the same. As we look back, 2.5 years is a short amount of time to gain perspective on an event with the impact of 9/11. I remember when Chinese leader Zhou Enlai was asked in 1970 to assess the impact of the 18th century French Revolution, and he responded, "It's too soon to tell." So, as we look ahead, to quote another famous political theorist, Yogi Berra, it's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. Still, it's clear that September 11th brought home to us the importance of foreign policy in a way that had been absent for many years. In the middle of the Cold War, even elementary school students understood that there was a foreign threat to our very existence, represented by a nuclear attack. We grew up in the shadow of the Soviet nuclear arsenal aimed squarely at our cities, and the Red Army massed just across the Ural Mountains. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I remember in the Cuban Missile Crisis figuring out that yes, the missiles in Cuba could reach Los Angeles, and therefore we all paid attention when our teacher taught us how to duck and cover. That said, I never have been able to figure out how putting our heads beneath our desk was going to save us from a nuclear bomb. Nonetheless, we did understand the threat, and we are now saw a new era take place after November of 1989, when the Berlin Wall began to crumble and the Cold War's days were numbered, and a generation of Americans was born into peace and prosperity and came to view us as invulnerable from threats beyond our border. Foreign affairs budgets sank. The triumph of liberal democracies and open economies was assumed. In the words of one theorist, Francis Fukuyama, history itself had come to an end. September 11th changed that. We learned again that American primacy doesn't mean we are free from foreign threats. Even a country with unprecedented economic, political, military, and cultural power, and nestled behind vast oceans, cannot be fully insulated from every threat, particularly in a world marked by globalization. With this renewed recognition of our interconnection with the world has come a new resolve for international engagement. Our challenge is to channel this resolve into the right causes. We haven't always done so well at identifying those causes. As Joyce pointed out, I was serving as President Clinton's advisor for Africa in 1994, and I remember struggling without success to convince people that Rwandan's genocide actually did threaten our national security. The prevailing wisdom was that the genocide, while certainly a human tragedy, did not threaten our national security and thus did not warrant even the most modest American intervention. Now we understand that our lives here in America can be touched in the most immediate ways imaginable by a brutal dictator in Iraq, a failed state in Afghanistan, drug trafficking in the Andes, trafficking of women and children in East Asia or the Balkans, and the AIDS virus in the bloodstream of millions of Africans. In today's interconnected world, crises won't stay put. They cause suffering and instability, not just in one region, but spill over and spark conflict elsewhere. Thus, as President Bush said recently, America must stand firmly for the non-negotiable demands of human dignity, the rule of law, free speech, freedom of religion, equal justice, respect for women, and religious and ethnic tolerance. In Iraq, this meant that the president led an international coalition to enforce UN resolutions and remove Saddam Hussein's regime. 2 points have become clear in Iraq. First, the task to build democracy, respect for human rights, religious freedom, and economic development will be extremely tough. It will require our strongest commitment, and there are no quick fixes. But secondly, by acting in Iraq, the United States and its allies freed 25 million people from a brutal dictatorship that developed and used weapons of mass destruction, harbored known terrorists, defied more than a dozen UN Security Council resolutions, and threatened its people, its region, and the world. At the same time, it is of course preferable to avoid conflict if possible. The lessons of the last few years, from Afghanistan to Liberia, from Kosovo to Colombia, from Kashmir to Sudan, have brought a broad and growing recognition that conflict avoidance, conflict resolution, and post-conflict reconstruction form the bedrock of American diplomacy and promotion of American interests around the world. All of us who work at the State Department carry around a card in our wallet with the State Department's mission statement, which is, and I quote, "to create a more secure, democratic, and prosperous world for the benefit of the American people and the international community." But it's impossible to support democracy, good governance, stable multilateral institutions, open foreign markets, and economic growth in the face of violence. Conflicts are also expensive. The international community spent more than $250 billion on 8 major humanitarian interventions and peacekeeping operations in the 1990s alone. By contrast, the cost of many of the programs to forestall conflict, including many of the programs that this institute supports, such as mediating conflict, building dialogues across ethnic and religious and regional lines, strengthening civil society, and creating rule of law, is a fraction of that amount. Regrettably, we seem as a nation and as an international community to be able to provide vast amounts of disaster assistance once conflict occurs, and yet we struggle to find resources to prevent these disasters from occurring. We need to match our generosity with foresight. This means doing better at knowing where to put our ounce of prevention. Looking back over the past decade, I constantly hear people say, if we had only paid more attention to Rwanda or Somalia or Haiti or the former Yugoslavia, we could have relieved so much suffering. Of course, this is true, but it suggests a degree of prescience on avoiding conflict that we simply don't have. Take Africa, for example. Most observers a decade ago believed that the transition from apartheid to democracy in South Africa would be the primary source of conflict on the continent. And yet the statesmanship of Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk marched that process forward. By contrast, how could you predict that former comrades in arms in the Horn, Ethiopia and Eritrea, would turn on each other in a brutal war, or that ethnically divided and ethnically united and resource-rich Botswana would be ravaged by HIV/AIDS, or that a single man, Jonas Savimbi, could defy the will of the international community and plunge his country of Angola back into civil war. In trying to predict where conflict will emerge, we've looked at scores of conflicts, and we can identify 7 factors. The first is the degree of political participation, responsive government, civil society, and rule of law. Countries are at risk if there aren't safety valves to allow the peaceful redress of grievances. Second is population pressure, education, and employment. The quickest route to conflict is through youth unemployment, lack of opportunity, and hopelessness. Third is the extent to which religious and ethnic diversity is tolerated. Next, a phrase that we hear in another context, location, location, location. Countries in bad neighborhoods risk spillover from armed combatants, refugees, and arms flows. Countries in good neighborhoods receive a powerful dampening effect on potential violence. Fifth is limits on the role that the military plays in political structures. Sixth is international engagement and the openness of an economy and a political structure. Conflicts are like mushrooms. They grow best in darkness. The final factor is whether there's been upheaval during the past 15 years. Contrary to the warning you get on an investment prospectus, the past record is an accurate indicator of future performance. These are the factors that we need to monitor as indicators of potential triggers of conflict. We can't do much about some of these factors, nor can we stop natural disasters that translate into unrest. Still, every drought doesn't have to become a famine. For example, it's not the lack of rain alone that has pushed millions of Zimbabweans to the brink of starvation and millions of others across the border into South Africa. It's the failed policies and the lack of respect for rule of law and human rights shown by Robert Mugabe. There's no great secret in addressing these problems. In addition to the diplomatic efforts at peace and reconciliation, such as our efforts in Liberia, Sudan, and Kashmir, we need to inoculate societies abroad against unrest by encouraging sustainable development. The President has unveiled more than a dozen presidential partnerships that unite the talents, energies, and resources of our government with private actors, international organizations such as the United Nations, and foreign countries. For example, the Water for the Poor initiative is expanding access around the world to clean water and sanitation. The Clean Energy Initiative is helping families in developing countries replace wood and dung with modern energy sources in their indoor cooking, helping eliminate the smoke that causes 2 million premature deaths each year from respiratory illness. A new program, the Millennium Challenge Account, will provide $5 billion annually within the next 3 years to developing countries that are investing in their people's education and health, that are adopting good economic policies, and that are respecting human rights. Similar initiatives are promoting sustainable agriculture, protecting the Congo River Basin, combating HIV/AIDS, building low-cost housing, and expanding education, especially for girls. Equally important is a strong emphasis on the role of women, not just as victims of conflict, but as the key to preventing and ending conflict. This isn't just a question of fairness or equity. Bringing women to the peace table improves the quality of agreements reached and increases the chance that these agreements will be implemented successfully, just as involving women in post-conflict governments reduces the likelihood of returning to war. Reconstruction works best when it involves women as planners, implementers, and beneficiaries. The single best investment in revitalizing agriculture, restoring health systems, reducing infant mortality, and improving other social indicators after conflict is girls' education. Further, insisting on full accountability for actions against women during conflict is essential to rebuild rule of law. We know all these lessons well, but too frequently in the press of responding to the latest crisis, they get lost in the shuffle. There's a familiar pattern here in which the urgent pushes aside the important. And yet it is precisely in the midst of crises that these issues should take center stage. During my service as ambassador to Angola from 1995 to 98, we sponsored projects to assist women in the political and economic life of that country. There were women's dialogues across political and ethnic lines, women's NGOs, girls' education, microcredit, mother-child health care programs. And yet, when conflict reemerged in 1998 and millions of displaced persons needed emergency relief, we temporarily put aside our good intentions. We allowed ourselves to believe that the urgency of getting food to needy people outweighed the need to focus on women's participation. We soon recognized that we had a golden opportunity to lay the groundwork for post-conflict equality by bringing women to the table to plan for emergency relief, by using women's NGOs to distribute food, by assigning gender advisors to prevent domestic violence as ex-combatants return to their homes, and to ensure women a seat at the table in the peace talks themselves. These lessons were particularly useful as we addressed the political, economic, and security reconstruction of Afghanistan. Well-meaning experts, both Afghan and international, told us we shouldn't press for women to be involved in this process because it would alienate anti-Taliban forces and traditional Afghan leaders whose help we needed in the fight against terrorism. Fortunately, women's issues were given a place at the top of the agenda in our efforts in Afghanistan as we pressed for their full participation at the political conference in Bonn, the Reconstruction conferences in Washington and Tokyo, and the Loya Jirga in Afghanistan itself. It was no accident that President Bush invited the Afghan Minister for Women's Affairs to be present at his 2002 State of the Union address, or that the Women's Affairs Ministry got the first U.S. grant shortly thereafter. Women are at the center of our assistance programs. Women's interests are being promoted in education, healthcare, microcredit, political participation, journalist training, including at resource centers for women established throughout the country. We also welcomed the participation of more than 100 women at the recent Loya Jirga that prepared the draft for the new Afghan constitution, a constitution that clearly states that women are entitled to full human rights in that country. There's obviously a long way to go to overcome the twisted legacy of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, but there's been clear progress. One area where we need to do better is in post-conflict full accountability for actions taken against women. We welcome the spirit of reconciliation and forgiveness after peace comes in these conflict situations, but too often amnesties are granted. An amnesty is simply another word, unfortunately in too many cases, to say that men forgive men for atrocities that are committed against women. In Angola, for example, the government in UNITA provided 13 separate amnesties for each other. One amnesty even forgave both sides for crimes that might be committed in the future. Whenever a mass grave was discovered, the representatives of the international community were the ones who would go to protect the site of evidence in anticipation of the day when the Angolan authorities could be persuaded into investigating the matter. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to transitional justice, whether it's the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, the Gacaca Community Court System in Rwanda, a Human Rights Commission in Afghanistan, or international tribunals where local courts are inadequate. Ensuring accountability is essential to convince men with guns that there's no impunity in acting against women. I've said before that these issues are often referred to as the soft side of American foreign policy. But let me assure you, there's nothing soft about going after traffickers who turn women into commodities. There's nothing soft about going into a refugee camp to face down armed thugs who are terrorizing women, or holding warlords accountable for abuses against women, or forcing parties who are coming out of a war situation to give women a seat at the table in peace negotiations and post-conflict governance. These are among the hardest challenges we face. In all of these efforts, we welcome our strong partnerships and division of labor among governments, international organizations, and civil society. Each of us, through our personal associations with faith-based organizations, labor unions, charities, and other groups, plays a key role in building a better world by comforting the afflicted, building democracy, and strengthening civil society around the world. In the darkest and the nastiest corners of the world, the groups we support have often been the eyes, the ears, and the conscience of the international community. Today, there are some 29,000 American non-governmental organizations working overseas, And even as Americans tell pollsters that they oppose foreign aid, Americans privately give some $34 billion a year in assistance to groups and individuals abroad, or more than twice the amounts they give through government. But engagement doesn't end with writing checks. Citizens help set the agenda for foreign engagement. If you don't think that individual citizens can make a difference, think again. Global action over the past decade to eliminate the 70 million landmines planted in a third of the world's nations, to stem the spread of small arms and light weapons, to stop the use of child soldiers, to fight the endemic problems of trafficking, and to promote the rights of the disabled, all have their origins, in large part, in the actions of private citizens. In conclusion, some of my diplomatic colleagues may long for the days when the people's business was conducted far from the people's eyes, when open covenants arrived at openly was Woodrow Wilson's vision and not a reality, and when protests of government policies consisted of polite letters to elite foreign policy journals rather than protest marches in major streets. But the world's a better place because of your interest and your involvement in foreign affairs. You form a powerful constituency for international engagement in the face of those who would have us pull back and become isolationist in the face of a messy and morally complex world. Thanks for your engagement, and thanks for listening.
Recognizing that I'm standing in a Catholic university and not wanting to give offense, I thought about how to word this question, and I couldn't figure out how to do it, so I'm just going to go ahead. And I apologize in advance if I offend anybody by my question. It's incumbent upon the State Department to reflect the policies of the President. And President Bush's policies have been widely regarded as being anti-women, in the sense that women are to be denied the rights of reproductive control. And one of the most critical problems facing the underdeveloped world, or the developing world, or whatever politically correct expression you want to use, population control, women's rights, are all less than fulfilled if women don't have the right to control their own bodies.
Could you, I'm sorry, but since we have a lot of questions here, if you wouldn't mind posing.
You can't oppose what the President says, but how do you reconcile in the State Department carrying out policies which will leave women very much deprived of the rights they should have? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, and thank you for wording it delicately. I understand the depth of feeling that many people have on this issue. I will say that as in my position previously as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Population, Refugees, and Migration, we were very active in addressing issues of mother-child health care, addressing issues of HIV/AIDS in refugee camps around the world. We have been a strong supporter of the United Nations Fund for Population Activities, even given our concerns over their activities in China. We are one of the largest contributors, in fact, to that program around the world. We also have a wide variety of other programs designed to encourage reproductive health around the world. I think I'll leave my comments at that.
Thank you. You mentioned, this is from the audience, you mentioned work on landmines. Why hasn't this administration signed on to the international program to get rid of them?
It's not only this administration, it's the last administration as well that did not sign the international treaty. There are a few reasons why. One is that indeed the United States believes that it is still necessary to have landmines in the specific situation of North and South Korea along that border. And secondly, that the United States wants to preserve the right to use a mine which technically is not an anti-personnel landmine, but is a anti-tank landmine, which is legal under the treaty, but our particular landmine is not legal. But having said that, let me say that the United States is by far the largest contributor to programs around the world to fight landmines, including educating children and their parents as to the horrors of these weapons, to demine fields around the world, to do research and development into new demining technologies, and to assist the 300,000 victims of landmine accidents around the world. The United States has also stated that we will not export or sell any landmines overseas, that we are destroying our own stocks of landmines as quickly as we can, and that we have committed that by the year 2007, if we can find alternatives to existing landmines, we will indeed sign the treaty.
Thank you. Another question. How does a career diplomat in foreign affairs handle the revolving door foreign policies of the United States as presidential administrations change?
As delicately as possible. That's a cheap answer, but it is actually true. You have to recognize that as a career diplomat, you have a role to play with the administration of having institutional memory, of being able to be the one advocate within our entire government for foreign issues, because every other department in Washington has its constituency. We do not at the State Department, and therefore, in effect, we are free to advocate as we wish. Let me say also that if you truly disagree with the policy of a new administration, you have a variety of different options. You can seek transfer so that you don't deal with the issue at stake, and I will be quite frank with you that as an Africanist, I was very uncomfortable with our policies towards constructive engagement in South Africa. I very much wanted to deal with that issue, but I refused to ever serve in an African country while that policy was in place, because I simply was uncomfortable with it. Once Nelson Mandela was released from prison and our policy changed, I was there in literally 3 months. So you have to be able to adjust your career to accommodate those concerns, but ultimately, if you are truly uncomfortable with the policies of a new administration, unfortunately, you have to resign.
Thank you. The invasion of Iraq by the U.S. was unilateral. I'm sorry, I will come back to the audience in a minute. The invasion of Iraq by the U.S. was unilateral and was based on the presence of weapons of mass destruction. How would you justify such actions now that there has not been found sufficient evidence of such weapons?
I disagree with the statement that it was unilateral. The United States had 70 different countries that either provided troops or support. Okay. You didn't like that answer, right? It was also based on a Security Council resolution that had been passed 15-0 previously. Regrettably, the subsequent resolution could not be passed. It was indeed based on Saddam Hussein's refusal to allow weapons, inspectors of weapons of mass destruction into the country. That was a fact that he did refuse to do that. We have not had any accounting of the weapons of mass destruction, and it is perhaps too soon to tell. And I think I will quit at that point.
Okay. We have a couple of questions that deal with Iraq, but I'm going to move to something else. We may come back to that.
Okay.
And actually, we'll take a question from the audience first.
In your work with women, have you found women who have been acculturated to live basically a slave's life, have you ever found large groups of them to help you in your work anywhere in the world? And where would that be? Where they would dare to go out and demonstrate or do some civil disobedience or disobey their husbands or their fathers?
Oh, absolutely. There are many societies in which women are far from slaves, are far from dependent figures. I would point out to you things like South Africa, where the Black Sash organization was one of the truly courageous organizations taking to the streets. Today, in trying to build peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, women are stepping forward and expressing concern over the policies of all the different warring parties. In Angola, there were women who were prepared to step forward at great personal risk, and we had to, as a foreign government, essentially wrap the American flag around a whole variety of women who were willing to do this. And we would do this by inviting them to the embassy, to be being very public, and essentially this was vital to protect them from people who didn't want them to step forward. So absolutely, I've seen a number of cases of some very courageous women all around the world.
In fact, there are 4 questions from the audience related to the Middle East, and as you talk about the positive side of conflicts being resolved, we still have the issue in the Middle East. And I'm going to read one in total, and if you'll forgive me, I'm going to kind of summarize quickly a couple others. Having responsibility for ensuring that U.S. foreign aid is fully aligned with U.S. foreign policy, please explain how our aid to Israel and to the Palestinian Authority conforms to the U.S. desire for greater effort by Israel to promote peace with the Palestinian Authority. For example, by stopping the settlements, building the separation wall, destroying family homes, Palestinian combatants, etc. Similarly, there's someone who's asking about a Marshall Plan for the Middle East. Is that being considered? And then also there is a request that you compare the policy of the Israeli government in the partitioning of the West Bank with apartheid in South Africa. So those are all related. It's a lot to talk about.
Can't we go back to Iraq?
Well, that was a trick, so we can know.
Our policy towards the Middle East was spelled out by the President about 15 months ago, and it calls for the creation of 2 states in that region, Israel and a Palestinian state, both existing in conditions of security, both existing in conditions of trust with each other. We have a long way to go to get there. And we are, as I've said, working very closely with the United Nations, with the European Union, and with Russia as part of a quartet to get us there. The United States has endorsed very strongly a roadmap which involves pulling back the settlements that we're discussing, which does not talk in any way, shape, or form about the creation of a wall between Israel and the Palestinian state. We have been open in criticism of Israeli actions as appropriate, but we've also been very critical of actions by the Palestinian Authority in not bringing violence under control in their area as well. This is a 2-step process, and it requires the parties to get back on the track towards the roadmap to building peace in the region.
You mentioned that State Department ultimately serves the people of the United States. So my question is, when will the State Department's coziness with the Saudi Islamists/Wahhabists translate into meaningful action to contain the threat of global terror? Thank you.
Well, it's a good question, and the United States is working very closely with the government of Saudi Arabia to limit any support that government gives to Wahhabism. We saw the implications of that in Afghanistan, where radical Islam took over and caused that country to implode. It had a direct impact on American national interests, as you've suggested. The United States has diplomatic engagement with the Saudi authorities. We've expressed our concerns over their contributions to assist individuals who are committing acts of atrocity around the world, and we will continue to express those concerns.
If I might add something to this. You talked about Kashmir. In Kashmir, 500,000 Kashmiri Hindus, natives who lived in that land before the advent of Islam, were ethnically cleansed. When you compare that to Bosnia, the whole world knows about it. State Department, I don't know why, constantly tries to muffle that ethnic cleansing. And I think most of the people feel that's not a fair thing to do. So I'm not trying to blame you for it, but
Thank you.
it seems like the Saudis have spent a lot of money. Somebody was telling me $80 billion over the last 10 years to basically hire a lot of ex-State Department people, create peace institutes, and Middle East studies to undermine this nation from inside, to wreck our country from inside. And that's a problem, and somebody needs to tackle it. I mean, there's a lot of criticism directed towards the State Department, and I think not everybody there is to blame, but there are certain element of truth to these allegations. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Given your comments concerning engagement in various venues, how can we continue to oppose and undermine the International Criminal Court? And as a second part of the question, our declaratory policy of preemptive war has created a schism with some of our long-term allies. How is the State Department addressing this conflict?
Well, those are two difficult questions, which are very different, but let me address them one after the other. On the question of the criminal court, the United States has been one of the strongest advocates for post-conflict accountability. And if we look at the criminal court for the former Yugoslavia, if we look at the criminal court for Rwanda, if we look at the criminal court for Sierra Leone, it's the United States that has provided much of the resources and much of the impetus behind the creation of those specific courts. The problem with the International Criminal Court is that there is a law that was passed by Congress, the Foreign Officers Servicemen Protection Act, that essentially says that American citizens should not be held accountable before courts that are not accountable to them. And this is a basic principle of American law, that you have to be tried by your peers. We believe that in the United States there are sufficient conditions of rule of law, conditions of justice that will hold individuals accountable for their actions. And therefore, the United States cannot adhere to the International Criminal Court. We are in the process of trying to act under certain provisions of that act, Article 98 in particular, to sign agreements with foreign governments that make clear our position on those issues. And that's basically the answer. On the question of preemption, I understand the concern that people express on that issue. Let me say that the entire discussion of preemption, which occurred in the National Security Strategy, consisted of 2 sentences in a 45-page document. It basically said, in just basic language, that the United States, if it is faced with a threat where deterrence cannot deter the action, where we cannot in advance indicate to a foreign government or to a foreign actor that the response will be overwhelming in reaction to an aggressive movement against the United States, then we have to have another capability. It is simply, to me, logic to say that the United States, if threatened with a preemptive attack from a foreign country or a foreign terrorist organization needs to have the capability of acting in response. And especially that is the case when we're dealing with issues of weapons of mass destruction. I would not argue, though, that this has caused a rift with foreign governments. This itself, I understand that other actions that the United States may have taken do create a division. In this case, virtually every government around the world has recognized the notion that if you're faced with a possible attack of tremendous consequence, that you have the right to preempt that attack.
If I can push you a little bit.
Please.
Your response to the first part of the question on the International Criminal Court, I'd like to just ask a couple questions, because it's my understanding that the Rome Statute on the International Criminal Court actually says that anyone indicted for war crimes should be tried by their own country, in their own country, if that country is capable of trying them, if they have a functioning judicial system, which this country certainly has, and that cases would not go to the International Criminal Court unless the country is incapable of prosecuting these people in their own country. And then the second part of this is these Article 98 agreements. I must admit I take great exception to, because I find them extremely cynical ways of undermining justice by having countries that have experienced genocide like Cambodia, Rwanda, or ethnic cleansing in the Balkans, where they're signing bilateral agreements that they will not extradite people indicted for war crimes. And yet these are people who've seen it. And so I'm curious how this functions with U.S. policy, which you say is increasingly aimed towards human rights, and yet it seems to me that we'd be better off ratifying, at least being at the table for the ICC. At least we should be part of the discussion, as we were under the Clinton administration, even though they didn't like it any better than the Bush administration does, but at least they had signed on to it so they could be in the room.
I'm waiting for the applause. On the first part of your question, culpability is in the eye of the beholder. And when we have Danish courts indicting former secretaries of state for war crimes and in similar activity, I'm sure there's some people who believe that that's appropriate, but in all seriousness, to say that we want them to be tried in their own countries, if that's appropriate, simply opens the door for the criminal court to say the United States cannot judge its own people because its policies are inconsistent with true justice. And there's no question it would open the door towards trying Americans in international courts, especially if we were part of peacekeeping operations.
I appreciate the position that you're in with these questions. My understanding, based on what I read in the press, is we're spending about $1 billion a week in the destruction and reconstruction of Iraq. And perhaps you could kindly clarify, devoid of speculation and theory, but what specific evidence can you offer me as to what threat is the Ba'ath Party directly against my country?
What was the threat?
What was and what is the threat of Saddam Hussein's Ba'ath Party against my country?
All throughout the 1990s, there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
I mean now.
Right this second? I would say that the Ba'ath Party is probably not much of a threat, and I would say that Saddam Hussein is no threat to the United States right this second, because he's in control. I don't know if I'm missing a nuance in your question.
I'm just trying to understand why we are there and why we're spending American lives and destroying the lives of Iraqi citizens I just fail to understand why we're there.
The United States is there.
I'm not understanding any connection with Al-Qaeda. No one has verified, has been able to provide scientific evidence for that. So I'm just missing the point of why we have invaded Iraq.
The United States is in Iraq right now to try to encourage democracy, stability in a key region. If you look at the countries that Iraq borders, there is a real threat of instability throughout that whole region. We are going to be there for the long run, so we're going to be there to try to encourage a new government, to try to reestablish an economy that has been destroyed during the process of the past decade as Saddam Hussein built palaces and invested in weapons of mass destruction. This is going to be a long-haul effort, and it's in the interests of the American people.